like when you're scared about something, it puts you on the edge and makes you pay attention, which I think brings you to a point where you're actually going to make more wise decisions.
Welcome to the 50th episode of the Learn Squared podcast. And for this milestone episode, we lined up Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson as our special guest. But we decided we can do one better. So instead we ditched him for today's guest, Maciej Kuciara. Our Learn Squared co-founder and instructor is also a legend in the industry, who began his journey at a young age to become one of the most sought after and influential out-and-out creatives in our field. And in this wide-ranging episode, Maciej drops many profound, honest and inspired insights into how he built his career and, more importantly, how he navigated the many obstacles that he has faced along the way, which is perhaps fitting considering the ominous shadow of AI and how this and future technologies are shaping our futures. There's plenty of topics covered in this one, so let's go. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Learn Squared podcast, and special episode today. It's a milestone episode in the shape of episode 50. And we've got a special guest on for you today as well. Please welcome Maciej Kuciara. Hello, Maciej.
Yo, what's up?
Thank you for jumping on. We'll pretend that this is the first time we've done this because I didn't press the record button a few seconds ago. But yeah, thanks for coming on. And obviously, like, I'm pretty sure, well, you definitely don't need an introduction from myself and for a big chunk of our audience. But we always get new guests coming on. We always get a lot of students who are fresh into the industry, entering this space, and everything is fresh to them. So to those people there, if you'd give them a nice introduction as to who you are, be very welcome.
Sure. Yeah, my name is Maciej. I am a co-founder of Learn Squared, obviously, and an artist, and I guess designer, director. I could call myself a director now, since I've directed a couple of things. Been working in the entertainment industry since 2004. You know, grew up in Poland, self-taught artist. I think that kind of encapsulates most of what I've done so far.
Dude, so like, again, you mentioned a few titles there, almost like, you know, royal titles, you could say. But like, when you started out, how many titles did you have then? Was it just literally artist or digital artist, concept artist? What did you call yourself?
No one.
Okay.
No, hold on. So I took art seriously like in 2003, I think.
Okay.
Like took it like seriously, where I actually understood that you could actually be an artist for a living, basically. Because before that, you know, like I grew up always thinking that, you know, artists, like the starving artist myth. Artists for like losers on the street selling paintings, you know, that's basically sort of the only kind of knowledge that I had about art in general. Obviously, I was like super interested in films, like watching films on VHS tapes, those good old times of, you know, early 90s or late 80s, where you would have like, you know, bootleg VHS tapes from like the local market. And like, oh, the new Van Damme movie is out, or like the new Rambo is out. Like this is the only way you could see it, because obviously nothing was on TV. And then video games, later RPG games, like the tabletop RPGs like Warhammer and Dungeons and Dragons. So like there was always like sort of the interest in the fantasy things, and like, you know, books. I remember reading Tolkien books, like the Lord of the Rings, for the first time when I was a kid. And then like I was so fascinated by the books, like I want to read them in English. And I you know, my English was very bad back then, but I felt like reading Lord of the Rings like 3 times in English, I think helped me to kind of get better at it too, right? So yeah, it's just like I kind of grew up in sort of the bedrock of what entertainment is built upon. So it was not like I was naturally leaning towards it. And then I think I've mentioned this a couple of times, but like my main, like the biggest epiphany that, oh, this could be an actual job is first like hearing about this Polish director who made a short film that got nominated to Academy Awards. Like, holy crap, like, you know, that's super awesome. And it's an animation, right? And it was Tomek Bagiński and Cathedral. And then like I got super interested. Like I had to find out what that is. And then I remember watching like behind the scenes on how the short was made. And you know, they had cameras in like in their Warsaw studio, Platic Image, with like a bunch of artists working on tablets and like painting. It's like, and like it clicked right away. It's like, oh my God, those are people sitting in the office and painting. Like, what the hell? Is it like a work or something? And it started like clicking right away. And that was like the spark.
And
for getting into the industry.
How would you qualify your skill level at that point? Like, obviously, looking at it as an educator now and someone who critiques work for not only as a profession, but obviously you've done it in educational terms, and I guess you got the you know, the joy of hindsight from looking back. But like, what would you class your level as at that point in time?
Pretty terrible, I would say. Yeah, pretty terrible. I mean, I think I understood what digital art was before I saw Cathedral, because I remember like drawing, and I remember seeing obviously Star Wars movie. Like hold on, I think the Star Wars episode 1 and 2 and 3 came out after. I can't remember. I would have to look it up when exactly they came.
2001. I think they all came. I think 99 was Phantom Menace when that came out.
Was it? Okay.
Around that time, yeah. Matrix, Phantom Menace, Lord of the Rings all came out in a few years of each other.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. My timeline is completely screwed. Okay. So, no, wait. I think the what's the second episode?
Attack of the Clones.
Attack of the Clones.
Yeah.
I think that came out later, right? Like 2005?
Yeah.
Something like that.
Time. Yeah.
Yeah. So Phantom Menace was already out. So, okay. So I can't remember like exactly when I started looking into digital art, but I was drawing. I was drawing since I was a kid. Like I would just draw with pencils and, you know, and then, you know, play Warhammer. I would draw my own characters, like imagine what my characters would look like and kind of draw them. And then like, you know, watch fantasy movies and, you know, Hercules TV show. Like, it was like, oh my God, this is so cool. And then eventually I found out about this Polish forum, like the artists forums called Max 3D, where I would find out like about, oh, there's like a pretty large community of artists in Poland that already draw. And then I would, you know, discover that, oh, some of them are like drawing in the computer, like painting on the computer, doing digital art. Then by proxy, people would mention like, oh, you guys should like go check the Siegen forums, you know, like, and I would go to Siegen forums. There was this famous speed painting thread. I think I was started by Craig Mullins, basically. And he was like the OG of Siegen forums. And then I would see all the craziest like speed painting and, you know, digital art is like, I gotta do that. Like, I have to try this. Right. And then, so first, like, painting would be with mouse and it kind of looks like shit, like completely useless, you know, no pressure sensitivity and whatever. And I was like, and I would research, okay, what the hell? Like, how do I get it right? Because it doesn't feel right. Like, it feels horrible to draw like this. So I would find out, oh, you need like a graphic tablet. And I would look up like the Wacom tablets and they were like, what, like $400? Like what? Yeah. That's like my mom's salary for 2 months. Dude, like, there's no way. Like literally that, right? Like, like growing up really poor, like anything beyond like $10 was like, oh, anything already like a $10 level was like, that's super expensive. Like, I cannot afford this, right? I was so poor.
Yeah.
So I remember I would ask my mom, it's like, I need to find a job to make money. And so she would find me like a janitor's job, basically. Like, you know, so I would go and work as a janitor So half time at school and half time doing that. I was at high school, and then after high school, I would go and clean places, usually like hospitals, and and I remember I got my first paycheck. It wasn't like an actual paycheck because I was actually helping my mom.
Right.
So she would actually pay me.
Okay, cool.
So we would just make money. Like, I mean, we were so fucking poor. Like anywhere you could make money, you just make money, right? Yeah. And I remember getting like my first $50. I'm like, fuck, that's so much money. Like shit, like amazing, right? And it was still not enough for a Wacom tablet, right? Like, there's no way. Like, I would have to work for like 2 years or something. But then I found out there was like this other like alternative. It was called Pentagram tablets, and those were the ones where you had like the pen, you needed like a batteries in it, and also there was like a cable connecting to the tablet, and like the pressure sensitivity was like, maybe 1/10 or something. There was still pressure sensitivity, but it was like very, very low.
Okay.
Like the drawing area was low. The precision was kind of shitty, but it was like, magnitudes better than mouse. So I remember like that was a starting point. And my first computer, I remember we bought it from like, I think it was like a bankruptcy of like an office studio, like some kind of like typical like blue chip office in my area, and they were doing like the basically like a fire sale of all the equipment to kind of cover the bankruptcy costs. And they had like those old Dell computers with like the CRT that sits on the box, computers. And that's the one I got. That was the first one I got. I don't even remember what kind of graphics. I don't think it had a graphic card or whatever. It was and then like, okay, what software do I use? Right? Like, well, computer was first. Then I obviously found out what software to use. Everyone knew Photoshop. Back in those days, Photoshop was like what, $4,000 or something.
Yeah, just a little bit more than it is now.
It's like, what the hell? Is like, how do those people like afford this shit?
Wow.
And so, you would find your ways to get it, right?
Let's
put it this way. Yeah, there were means to get things done, let's say. And I remember like, started painting and started like just drawing, and through CGen and Max 3D forums, I would discover just so many digital artists that, ironically, some of them I met later in my life, like David Levy and Sparf, and, like some of like the really good French painters. And I got to like, one of like highlights to me was, when I was young and learning those things, and learning math, like learning how to paint, learning how to be a digital artist, you would stumble upon those names like Craig Mullins, Ryan Church, James Klein, and Dylan Cole. Is like, oh my God, those are like the OGs of the industry, like the best of the best. You would see them working on like the Lord of the Rings series and doing like photorealistic matte paintings and concept art, and like, how the hell they are like able to make it like my shitty drawings look like ass, and then they are doing this like photorealistic stuff that they're like digital art gods. And then you like meet them later in life, and it was like pretty crazy kind of experience to go from like being no one to be at the level where you could like talk with someone like that as a peer. So that by itself was crazy. But yeah, it's sort of like kind of slow discovery of like the early 2000s. And then 2003, 4 was like the sort of like an aha moment. It was like, okay, this could be actually something. So,
dude, like, there's it's pretty cool hearing that. Like, firstly, pretty much your professional career has been always linked to digital art and the career that you have right now. Like, it's
mostly, yes.
It was to fund doing this, and you made it happen. Like, so yeah, that and alone, like that, I guess, origin story is just perfect inspiration for anyone who's just thinking about it, going through stuff, finding that it's super difficult, whether like, like the mobility factor of trying to get to the level that you need to get to, it can put people off. But then at the same time, you're super persistent about it. But your
Remind
journey,
me to go back to exactly what you just said when we. Now I'm pretty sure we're going to dive into AI.
Mhm.
I think that's going to be pretty important. What you just said, I think, is very important
Cool.
to kind of elaborate upon, especially with like the advent of AI. Yeah,
for sure. And yeah, man, like I wasn't aware. Obviously, I'm familiar with that story. I think I've pretty much listened to every Art Cafe and all the Twitch streams and everything else as well. And I think it's quite poetic. And just to kind of like, I guess, highlight that is the way you described it is perfect. Like the way you just said, these people who were the OGs, the art gods, you know, like these were the ones that kind of set the tone. You learned from them or observed them, you looked up to them, and now you are a peer. And that just shows like it is achievable. And even like say, compare myself to yourself, our work is miles apart. And I'm not saying mine's better than yours, it's more the other way around. But at the same time,
hey, who knows?
But at the same time, it's like just looking at your pathway, and many others that have explained it as well. It doesn't put you off. And did it ever put you off at that point with thinking that, you know, like I'm never going to reach this level? Or did you have that kind of fire burning inside you thinking, I can't wait to get to that level? Like, what was your mentality like?
Oh, it was mixed. Like I never ever in my life expected to get where I am. I'll be honest. Like I always wanted to be, like I always wished, like I wish I was that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But never thought I would be there. Like I would never in my life imagine doing the things I'm doing, to be honest.
So it's like a surreal feeling even still now.
Yeah, because like, can you predict that your hard work is going to pay off eventually? So at least to a certain degree. Like I think what's skewing everything right now, and this could be another topic on its own, is I think what happened with 2008, 2009, and the advent of social media like Facebook, and then later Twitter, Instagram, and now TikTok, and all of those places, is that it shows you very sort of curated and often unrealistic view into other people's lives. And you know, you always hear about the overnight success, and you know, and sort of like it's such an easy mental exercise, that like not really a demanding mental exercise, to assume that, you know, someone was just born gifted, or someone didn't, you know, get lucky and go to that place. It's very easy to think about that when you see people starting companies and starting their own like entrepreneurial roads. And there are so many success stories. Obviously, you see those big companies, like you hear about Bezos' yacht being bigger than a city. And it's like, how the hell he's making all that money? You know, there's just so many things that you see, but you don't see is like the endless count of dead bodies, let's say, of like failed projects and people who had amazing ideas, and they had those ideas, but they were not lucky with timing, or they were not lucky or prepared to, you know, mingle with the right people at the right time to get things going. You have a lot of people who work incredibly hard and they just lack other abilities to get there. You have people who are incredibly, you know, gifted, let's say, whether it's true, like they were born with like a special sauce in their DNA that makes them just like your eye-hand coordination is incredible. You see those videos of like professional gamers who is like, how the hell they know what they're clicking, like, or like the reaction time to like, you know, like the sort of dexterity games that they play, and like what is like, you don't even know what's going on, and they're like clicking everything because they're just so fast. The eye-hand coordination is so well developed.
It's crazy.
Like you can develop, I'm pretty sure you can develop that skill to a certain level, but you know, there's certain, like, I'm pretty sure there's like certain DNA that makes your eyes react faster. Therefore, you're like better at it. And so like you could consider that talent could be that, right? Like, I don't know. I'm not a scientist. Obviously, it's like my sort of assumption of things. That would be like the best disclaimer to that subject. because like I cannot be LeBron James. Like, come on, I'm not as tall. I'm tall. I'm generally tall, right? I'm a pretty tall person, I would say, but I'm not as tall, and I'm definitely not as athletic, and definitely not as skilled. Although I'm pretty sure, I could get to like a good, high schooler basketball player level if I committed myself to like really become a basketball player, I guess. But to get to those like really high levels, it's just a little more, right?
But then, sorry to interrupt, but what about in reverse? Could LeBron James be Maciej?
I don't know. It's a very, very interesting question, right? I think generally there are certain. I don't think it's all just one thing. I think it's a mixture of everything, right?
Mhm.
And your upbringing has a lot to do with where you end up being in your life. I'm like, there's just no doubt about it. Like if you grow up, look, you can be the smartest person on earth. You can have like a really high IQ and then be, really driven. If you grow up with like the wrong crowd, you're going to be driven towards the wrong things because that's the only thing you're going to hear about. Like that's the only life you can imagine. And sometimes all it takes is just to have one person to spark you thinking it differently, to make different decisions. Sometimes what it takes is you just being stubborn and like have a conviction to do something, and then you go on the right path for you. But a lot of people don't. So yeah, I don't know. What was the original question? I know we were kind of going on all tangents, but
let's stick with the LeBron stuff. Like that's something that I've been dwelling on a fair bit as well. Like not extensively, but it's kind of like something I've been thinking about on and off a fair bit. It's a case of obviously you see these high level people, and you mentioned obviously like gamers who are just crazy good. It's almost like superhuman level. But like you mentioned LeBron as well. I think athletes are a great example. Like if you look at any kind of sport, you can kind of see what you need to be good, like, the training regimes and all that kind of stuff. But then you see people who are at the top level, the stuff that they do, it's just insane. Like, it's just insane that you kind of think that it can't be trained. But then let's take a couple of examples where if you do study them, you kind of see that it does begin at a young age, or they've been doing that thing that they're great at forever. Like,
correct, yeah.
Take Lionel Messi and Lewis Hamilton. They've been doing it since they were before puberty, for example. And then they've stuck with that kind of same thing. And
like 4 or 5 year old and they're already karting. Yeah.
Or like Mozart.
No, yeah.
Even. Yeah.
But see, that has a lot to do with like upbringing, right? And okay, like the super achievers, super athletes, I really don't know like what kind of sauce you need to be made of to get to that level. Because trust me, like putting the amount of effort those people are putting into their craft is unfathomable. Like totally, I can sit and watch a YouTube video for like an hour and consider like that not to be a waste of time because I already been productive that day. And I feel like I work way too much, by the way. I already feel like, I think something's wrong with me if like 2, 3 a.m. and I still feel like I need to do more work because it's too early to go to bed. And like, that's sort of like what my brain is telling me, even though I know that's probably a bad idea. For those guys, like spending an hour watching a YouTube video is such a waste of time, and they could just be perfecting what they're doing, when you meet people that are on like the highest level of their achievement, it's just incredible to see how well organized their lives are. And okay, there are like absolute savants there as well, right? They just don't put effort, but they're just built different, let's say, right?
Yeah, no, for sure.
There are people like that. And I would say I consider myself in art to not be like extremely talented or whatsoever. Like, look, like maybe there's something in my brain that makes my decision making to be a little better than someone else's, or maybe not. I really don't know. I'm not. That's just not my field. I'm not a scientist to tell that. What I know for a fact is that I never considered myself a good designer. I considered myself to work hard to become a good illustrator, and kind of learn the right things and sort of like find my way to learn those things through trial and error. But you have to think about where I am right now. It's like, it's not something that happened overnight. It's something that I like struggled with for like almost 20 years, basically. And like in today's environment, and let's say in an environment up until 2020, let's say, because since then, like everything's changed. Like 20 years is a lot of time to learn something, right? And do it right. Versus you see, I mean, even through Learn Square, like how many students of ours are just incredible by just taking some of the classes, right?
Yeah.
And how crazy is that you can take a class from an like really talented, like really well versed, really smart instructor who will teach you the right things, and then you just know it. You didn't spend 5 years trying to figure that out. You just know it from this one class. And there's like so many of those classes you can take, and then you realize like, oh, why I was doing this specific thing that way or another for like last 5 years. That's such a feels like such a waste of time, right? So it's almost like taking the classes from the right people. It's almost like you're taking a shortcut to learn the right things like right away, which is great. I wish I had it when I was, because there was no online learning when I was learning. Like it was literally you go on forums and ask people. That was the only way to learn, because obviously I couldn't afford to go to art schools. Noman videos were like the first videos that would come out, but that was like, those were DVDs, and you know, they were super expensive. And they were like more when I was already like working in the industry. So yeah, I don't know.
Now, like, let's say you did at that point in time, there was a Learn Squared available at that point in time, or that even like just the internet as it is today, where you can pretty much just ask a question and get a follow-up or get feedback even. How quick do you think you've reached the level that you are at now?
Fraction of time?
Like a couple of years maybe, or even less perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's one thing to learn techniques and sort of like the technical knowledge. I think that you can learn in weeks. You can pick up Blender in weeks and be like really, really proficient. It's just a matter of like the time you put in and the material you're learning from. Because you can go on YouTube and find everything for free. There are a bunch of channels who are amazing at teaching, right?
Yeah.
But you need to find them. Like you need to find the right one. And sometimes finding the right one means you're watching a dozen of the bad ones. Because it's very difficult to kind of figure out which of the knowledge you're consuming is actually going to be useful for you. Because all the knowledge could technically be useful, right? And
that's a kind of like battle in itself, right? Like the knowledge is there, but then to decipher it is almost like a new problem. Whereas perhaps before, without that, you kind of, in a slow way, although it's much slower, you kind of, is easier to stay on the right path, I guess. Or would you?
Right. And sometimes you need to make mistakes like that and learn the wrong things to realize you're learning the wrong things, and then be able to kind of, you know, sniff the bullshit, let's say, easier, and find something that's more correct. Like my rule of thumb for YouTube videos, if I want to watch something about a very specific topic and learn about a very specific topic, if the video starts with "Hey guys" and then 10 minutes of what I ate for breakfast, I just stop watching. Like, fuck off. Like, I'm not going to watch that. Because it's clearly not about the subject. I just don't enjoy that kind of stuff. And oftentimes it's just like someone who would be on the student level that has like nothing really important to say, but they make it look quote unquote professional. Therefore, you know, and look, to me, that's entertainment. Like if you're into that, then sure, cool. That's totally fine. But it's not really how you get, like, how you excel in knowledge.
But that's interesting as well, because I guess the YouTube space, or just even that kind of like online sphere now of like social media, Gen Zs and the generation behind that now, that is the way they communicate. That's what they grew up on. Like obviously ourselves, I think I'm a few years younger than yourself. Like I totally get what you were saying when talking about VHSs and acquiring things and just that digital analog age and that transition to digital, then to what it is now. Like the new generation is purely digital and purely remote even. So in a way, it's kind of like they don't know any other way. Not saying that they can't do it in a different way, but it's almost like, hey, everything they see is, hey guys. So they think, hey, that's what we have to do, is just do a hey guys type thing.
I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Like all I'm saying is like, if I'm looking for an answer how to work with the nonlinear animation in Blender, and I'm Googling or like finding that topic on YouTube, and there's a 10-minute video, and I have to scrub first 5 minutes to find out if there's any knowledge, that's just a waste of time, right?
Yeah.
That's just not productive I'm not going to YouTube to watch someone eating food, right?
No, for sure. Yeah.
If I was into that, I will watch the channels that are that. And I get it. I get why people do that. Like I'm not even saying that's wrong. I'm just saying that for acquiring knowledge that you want to acquire, you just have to siphon through a lot of content to find the right things and be able to like not waste time on sitting and hearing like someone's vlogging about something and then getting like a bits of knowledge towards the end, and then realize like that's not what I was looking for, and then like I just wasted time.
Now, dude,
you see my point?
Yeah, 1,000,000%. I totally agree with you as well. But it's also like, do you think, and this is not just for art, just like I guess everything in life in general, when you're trying to figure something out or discover something new, like it's always going to be like that, don't you think? Like where it's just going to be, you have to kind of decipher information. Obviously, there's always going to be places where it's done nicely and it's done correctly and you get what you need. But for the most part, it's always going to be that kind of, you have to kind of, like you mentioned, deciphering. So we've always got to kind of train that aspect within ourselves to know how to filter the bullshit from the good shit, right?
Yeah, well, that's what I think where like any training material, like training online material, like what we do with Learn Squared, there's a bunch of others that are really popular as well. All of them are good because they, especially if they're run by people who understand the industry, then you know that what you're learning is at least putting you on the right path, where the things are, like where the things really are, you know? I'll give you an example. So Blender is like a huge thing right now. It's like, I would say top 3 software for production easily. And I see like everyone, not everyone, but obviously like Maya and, you know, other software is used more in like VFX production and game studios and whatever, like Motion Builder for animation. Like there's just certain like industry standards that are still sort of there. I think those are like almost like a dinosaur level. It's mostly because how customizable they are and how much support from like the corporate support those software have, and certain aspects of production that they can handle too, which matters a lot, especially if you're like running multi-million-dollar, you know, projects and like everything just needs to work, and you have like special development team that helps to write tools that are like interconnected and all that. So those exist, but like in 3D, like whether it's modeling, animation, like Blender has gained quite a significant grounds over I would say last 3 years, easily, right?
Definitely.
It was unheard of, and you know, I'm speaking from experience working in film and video games. It was unheard of to hear. It was unheard of to see someone work with Blender, let's say 4 years ago, in the production environment, and now it's pretty common, like just in a matter of like a couple of years. So if 10 years ago you would ask me to, you know, if you would want to find out what's the software to learn, and for specifically for like, let's say 3D modeling and production, and someone would just like saying Blender because it's free, like no, man, like that's just not gonna get you anywhere in the industry, right? But now it will. And you hear it from people who work in the industry. Like someone who works in the industry will tell you what it is, right? So that's the valuable part of like online schools. And because look, I think I mentioned this many times. I don't think like the analog schools, like where you pay high tuition to go to like art center and, like brick and mortar, basically schools where you have to take like a huge debt, or big universities that teach art. I think that's a relic of the past, to be honest. Like even to a certain degree, I thought like going to that kind of environment helps you to get the discipline, but that's eroding from what I'm hearing, from friends and people who'd go to like brick and mortar schools where, it used to be that you have to work like really, really fucking hard to even pass the exams, or like get to a point where, you feel like you're doing something. And now it's more about money than anything. And honestly, I don't think it's worth, because you can, from like the perspective of learning the material, you can find everything online. And if you're like really smart, you will find everything for free.
Yeah.
Like that's just true.
And I guess like
I shouldn't say that running Learn Squared, right? Like, but honestly, like,
well, our first lessons are free, so it's all good.
Right. Yeah. But what's helpful is to know that the school has a reputation for having teacher who actually have experience in the industry, and they teaching you the right thing, or even just the organization by itself curating the material to like point you in the right direction. I guess that's what I'm getting at, right?
Nah, dude, totally. And just like lumping my experiences with that, I'm a testament to what you just pretty much said. Like it was 2004, 2006 when you entered the industry, correct?
Yeah.
So around that time, I had entered college after high school, and just messed around there for a couple of years trying to get to my university, which was transport design. And so like you're talking about 6 years almost in total. And within those 6 years, and then a big gap, and then to the point when I discovered Learn Squared, although there's many factors involved and I don't want to shit on the uni too much, I did learn some cool stuff. But in terms of what suited me and the way my brain works and the way I want to learn, even the career that I wanted to take, which wasn't really available at the university, and I didn't even know what I wanted to do, but I learned more in a couple of courses that I took at Learn Squared first, let's say 3 months, versus those 6 years. And even everything that I've done in myself, learning, let's say, chapter of my life, it's just I can't compare it to the brick and mortar stuff. And I guess even for our industry, you don't necessarily need that structure, unless it would be in doctors perhaps, or lawyers or physicists or whatever. Of course, maybe you do need those kind of structures.
I totally agree.
You can't
agree.
YouTube.
Yeah.
Hopefully don't go to a doctor that's learned their surgery from YouTube.
Online.
But
from YouTube.
But nevertheless, for art and stuff, it's a practice, and it's something that you nurture. You don't need to kind of like get a piece of paper. And trust me, I did that when I got my degree. I was like, hey, I've got a degree, give me a job. And I was like, no, thank you. And it was only the portfolio that I made after working hard that got me the jobs.
Yeah, I totally agree. There are obviously certain professions that require more traditional approach, right? You don't want to go to a doctor who's learned from YouTube, like,
or TikTok.
That's not, or TikTok, right? Yeah, the medical advice on online. So obviously those are the areas. Although I feel like with the advent of AI, that might be changing dramatically.
Nice segue.
But I don't know.
Yeah,
it's so difficult to know. But I agree. Like, let's put it in the context of last 10 years. Yeah, like if you wanted to be a doctor, you better go to like good medical school and learn all those things. And there's certain levels, like you're not going to be operating on someone's spine without having like crazy experience, knowledge, and rewards or whatever, like awards and whatever, right? Like I don't exactly know what skill sets are required to get there, but it's definitely not easy, and not everyone can do it, right?
For sure.
It's just a lifetime commitment to do that, to get there.
And they're like kind of like similar to the other examples you're looking at earlier, like athletes and even gamers, for example, like they are the elite of the elite of the elite. And it's again another testament to something they have to dedicate time to and perfect the craft on before you can do that top level stuff. And a quick question regarding that. So you're someone who I consider a legend, and I'm not saying that because I work at Learn Squared. Like this is something that I have thought before that point in time. What do you think? I know this is quite a vague question, maybe a leading question, but what kind of, I guess, say if you could narrow it to perhaps 3, because in the day of social media, no one's got attention. So we need 3 things. But what kind of like 3 things would you say are completely non-negotiable to maybe not master, but kind of make sure you're on top of to work at a high level in our industry?
I think I'm going to answer this, but we have to caveat that it should probably be a segue as well to AI.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I can, with a clear consciousness or with a clear conscience, answer it by the lens of, let's say, last 5-10 years, because that would be just, I mean, this is gonna, if I did that, it's gonna age poorly.
Right. Okay. Cool. We'll put a disclaimer on the screen as well.
Let's put it this way. So, well, there are certain traits that I always believed, and I still believe that are important, regardless of where the technology moves, which direction the technology is going to go, right? I think one of the things that we as humans understand and know and hear all the time is that we're absolutely terrible at predicting the future.
For sure.
But we're incredible at adapting to to what's happening, basically, right? Look at there's just so many like groundbreaking revolutions in that, like even in our lifetime, the invention of internet and how internet basically changed the world, and then how social media changed the world. Would you like, if you would ask me 15 years ago that dancing in front of your camera will make you a millionaire just because people click like and then you get sponsorships, I would say like you're fucking crazy, right?
Dude, look at it this way. No sci-fi author predicted that. They predicted technologies, but not that particular thing.
Right. So technology kind of like emerges, like it's kind of funny because a lot of like scientists who work on different technologies are like sci-fi nerds, so they like want to make what was written in the books, but then that becomes its own sort of thing and takes its own path, right? So it's like incredibly difficult to predict, and I would say that's going to be true for AI as well. Incredibly difficult to predict where it's all going to go. You can basically throw a dart and it's going to land somewhere, and you don't know where it's going to land. No, basically, it's you can assume certain things that could happen in the immediate future, right? But the ability to adapt and sort of change course or pivot, I feel like, is probably the most important human skill you need to have. And then be open-minded to learn, and basically never sort of like close yourself in your own bubble of thoughts, Like one of the, I think, mistakes of my life was just listening to like a limited amount of people about certain subjects, and then like discovering later in life that they were all wrong. They had like their own approach because they didn't know better. Whether it's about finances, about art approach, like you name it, like we all make mistakes. And so like if you're open-minded and are willing to listen to like sort of like the both sides of argument about things, then it at least gives you an opportunity to not be tribal about certain aspects of things and make your own decisions. Because like even if you make the wrong decision in your life, at least you can only blame yourself for it, right?
Yeah.
And you get to learn from that experience. Like that's an important part. You get to learn from your own experiences and make better decisions later. But if you only follow someone else's thoughts only and then never like challenge them, and then those are wrong, you're never going to blame yourself. Like it's rarely that you blame yourself, you blame the person that told you to do A, B, or C, right? And it's like maybe you learn something from that, like maybe don't follow that one specific thought, but you're already like one step behind because you're not really looking into yourself for the answers, you know? So ability to adapt and ability to sort of like be open to knowledge, that's always been a number one thing. And even like before AI started sort of making headlines, like look at the past decade of software development.
Great example.
It's kind of insane. Like
Mad.
From early days of Photoshop to, you know, the first introduction of ZBrush, that was back in 2006 or 5.
Yeah.
Where ZBrush was just like a 2.5D sort of like pseudo 3D, but it's not really. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, no one knew what to do with it, but they were kind of intrigued, but kind of thought, what do I do with this?
Nothing makes sense.
Yeah.
And then they pivoted to make it 3D sculpting. And then because they decided to keep their own old buttons and naming convention, it was all fucking confusing until people like just accepted it because like the sculpting experience was so great. Like just from there to where ZBrush is now, and like where Blender is now, like Blender is competing with ZBrush almost, right? Obviously, it's a little more limited because ZBrush is like very specialized specifically for sculpting, versus Blender is like, you know, more of like a whole package. So that like, I don't know, like you would never imagine you're going to be able to do things you're going to do in 3D, like rendering engine. Like you have Unreal Engine 5 with, what is it called? Lumen?
Yeah, Lumen, Nanite and all that good stuff. And who knows what's to come with that as well.
Yeah, I remember 2012, V-Ray you would need to punch in like math code for samples so the render doesn't take 2 hours. So you can get a small render of something that kind of looks realistic, but it's kind of noisy because you didn't have patience to wait for 2 hours for it to render.
Yeah.
And that's just one frame. That's not really complex, right? And like obviously film studios and animation studios, like those would use render farms because the one frame would render for an entire day of an animation that now you look back, like what the animation looked like let's say 12 years ago versus what it looks at now. It's just, you can't believe how quickly things progress. Same with films, right? You could argue that there's some stagnation in terms of like VFX in films. It's debatable because, you know, I remember when Avatar came out and that was considered to be like, I cannot believe that the movie looks like it looks, right? And now you watch Avatar, it's like, I can totally see where the CG is.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because you're like, at least for an artist, like you train yourself to understand because the fidelity of work has already progressed so far just in the last 10 years. Even a masterpiece of VFX, what Avatar was back in 2010, I think it was 2010 when it was released.
9 or 10, rather
2009.
Yeah.
Now it's like, I mean, it still holds up, but come on, man. Like I've seen better movies already.
Yeah.
Like better looking movies. And you watch Sicario, like for instance, you watch Sicario and the whole sequence over the border, especially like the aerial shots, they look just like aerial shots of like the border, right? And then you realize this all CG is like, what the fuck, right? It's crazy how things are progressing. And obviously there's like masterpieces that hold through time because they're just like, there was just like the Mayan fucking level sacrifice, like sacrificial, you're the VFX artist who's gonna die doing this project, right? There's just like, obviously that stuff is there and it still holds up. But like even now when you watch, Lord of the Rings, it's still like, it's impressive what it was, but you can totally see where the CG is. Like in some
Jurassic
shots,
Park
it's like,
too.
holy shit. Yeah. Jurassic Park is even crazier because that's sort of like actually kind of when you watch Jurassic Park and you consider that was like what, the late 80s, like early 90s, I think.
1992 when it came out.
Yeah.
I'm sure they're developing it in the late 80s.
Okay. It's like, okay, maybe my argument about progression is wrong when you watch Jurassic Park, because it's kind of incredible what they were able to do back then. But that's like one kind of a North Star, right? There's only few of those. And now you can get Jurassic Park level of work in matter of like minutes or hours on your own sort of laptop or iPad, right? It's crazy. So software progression has been crazy. And if you just like stuck to your, like, I only work with this software, then you would end up with like, oh, well, this software is now like 5 times slower and it's still more expensive than the alternatives out there. And, and nobody cares what software you use, honestly, at this point. So,
and like just touching upon software and just even tools in general, since you started way back when trying to get that Wacom tablet, for example, up to now, like how many times have you switched, maybe not switched, but kind of like changed the tools that you use to get the job done? I remember when a few years back you were talking about Blender and how it wasn't really ready for you to leave 3ds Max before you Blender, but I believe now Blend is your go-to. And even before that, I'm sure there were other things as well. So like how many times would you say you've even kind of like switched up your whole setup to adapt to the changes? I'm sure with the industry demands, and even probably with what you demanded from your workflow too.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, I tried a lot of different things. Early on, obviously Photoshop was like the number one tool back then. I remember, I do remember trying 3ds Max though, like trying to really learn it back in 2004, I think, or 2004, or maybe even 2003. But I remember like I wouldn't have like a right approach, and it kind of made me like not like it.
Right.
I think I was trying to do everything with NURBS, which is like millions of polygons at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And that was 2003, right? That's just ridiculous. I would have like a hand model that was like barely moving when you rotate camera because it was just so dense. And I was like, oh, there is so much detail. It looked like shit too. So I think that was sort of like, again, like if I knew better, I would probably have done it differently, and be more of like a 3D artist because of it, right? And then I think I didn't consider 3D to be viable for my work for a long time because I don't know. I think when I was learning digital art and being in the entertainment industry, there was stigmas about everything, basically, right? So everyone was purist, and that's sort of like goes back to your silos and listening to like the wrong people. It's like in digital art, it was really frowned upon if you use textures or photos in your work. And everyone's just like, you're a piece of shit. Like, you shouldn't do that and whatever. And then like everyone learned that, hey, even Craig Mullins uses photos because it's just faster way of working, right? Like that's where the whole photo mashing movement came from. And it's just like, well, yeah, of course, like all of that makes sense. And now everyone's like with the egg on their face, right? It's like, oh norm. Shit. Yeah, it's a norm. So that kind of makes you realize like, oh, maybe I'm listening to the wrong people and like I should like not assume. And to me, that was sort of like, I think I've been using photos in my work for quite a long time, but obviously I've spent probably like 5 or 6 years trying to be the purist, let's say. I think it was really helpful for me to understand how the lighting works and how to use brushes and all that kind of stuff. So So before I went to like the shortcut mode of digital art, I went through like the arc of doing everything by the book, let's say. But then when I started looking more seriously at 3D, I think like the first time I looked more serious on potentially using 3D in my work was working on Crisis at Crytek, where we would just literally do overpaints of the levels just to make them look better, so that the artists who are working on those could improve the quality of what's in the scene, or even just marketing art. Like that's just a pretty normal thing where you take screenshots and then you marketing art of it, and like they would always look great. But there were like, I think on Crisis 2, there was this moment where I would take like a really boxy kind of like New York City, Wall Street corner or something, and then do like an overpaint. And but then I would like go in and add textures, explosions, and whatever. And I was like a moment where I was like, maybe I should start using some 3D, because like it definitely makes it easier for like not spending your precious time to figure out perspective for every single fucking thing you're doing, instead of have like a tool that really just makes it much, much easier. And so like, I think from then I was pretty conservative about it, but I was like picking up, okay, I'm going to pick up 3ds Max and like start learning, like start with just simple things like boxes, right? Just make a couple of boxes that represent sort of the environment that I want to build. That's going to help me with like choosing the camera angle, maybe like a very simplistic lighting, where the shadow's direction is going to be. And then based on that, then I can choose, which parts to be painted, which parts to be used with photos, like that kind of stuff, right? And then progressively moving to like starting to understand 3ds Max more, how to model things in 3ds Max, and then using V-Ray, and sort of, progressively, like years over years, kind of increasing the percentage of 3D in my work, to a point where like I realized like I could probably do a lot of stuff in 3D before I even start painting. And I think that's where the switch. Well, you asked about Blender. I felt Blender wasn't ready, because up until like, I think 2.8 was the first time the Blender actually started to make sense, but it was still kind of very clunky. There was still things that you like, if you ever worked in 3D with like, whether it's Maya or Max, you understand that those software, like whether it's like Softimage, Maya, 3ds Max, Rhino, like, or whatever, name any like popular 3D software, they're all very similar in terms of how the UI works, what shortcuts are, what's the navigation feels like. Obviously there are differences, but it's much easier to switch between 3ds Max and say Maya, in my opinion, than any of those software in Blender. Because Blender has just like its own sort of philosophy about things. And so when I started looking into Blender, like it was just friction over friction over friction. And it made me feel like I'm wasting more time to trying to figure things out rather than doing the work. And you don't get that when you like, even with how complex and convoluted the UI with ZBrush is, like once you understand through 2 or 3 concepts, it's pretty easy to use. Like it's difficult to master, but it's pretty easy to kind of get in. Okay, I'll take a week to kind of understand the navigation UI, but it still feels the same, although the naming convention is kind of weird and makes no sense, right? But at least like the user experience is good. It's kind of seamless once you kind of get to the flow. And to me, Blender didn't have that for a long time. And I think, when was the first time I like actually started taking it more serious? I can't remember exactly when. Probably like 2018, maybe.
Okay.
2019. I think 2019. Yeah, 2019 was like, okay, like let me just look into this, because it seems like with Eevee and how it's progressing, there's certain things that could make my life easier. And I remember I started learning, like really going to deep dive into Blender when I was working on the Spider-Man No Way Home.
Right.
That was literally when like it it went from and I would literally like, okay, I'll carve out X amount of time to learn it and like really put my effort into it, right? But the learning was so convoluted. Like I remember just like literally every 2 minutes Googling how to do the most simple task because it was just nothing was making sense, right? And it was sort of like rewiring my brain from sort of like the traditional 3D software packages into like the Blender, let's say Blender philosophy. I mean, yeah, you can sort of set up Blender to make it work exactly like 3ds Max, but then you're losing certain efficiencies that Blender brings if you learn the Blender, let's say, quote unquote, the right way. And I remember when it started finally clicking, where things I could build took little to no time. And then I would have a render ready, like a quick EV preview, and just seeing productions designer, reaction to seeing like something done really quick in like a really efficient way that we could like iterate upon real time. That was like where like really click that there's something in there that, otherwise I would have to like render in V-Ray and wait, which was what everyone would be doing, right? So that progression was sort of like where, okay, that's where Blender is. And then from that moment on was basically, full dive.
And that
with
is
Blender specifically.
And like, we'll get to Shibuya in a second, but that is pretty much everything I believe that you've done for that. And even anything that you've done since is pretty much Blender, right? Or have you dipped into
most
some of
of
the
it,
older stuff?
I don't think I've used 3ds Max since then at all.
Crazy. Like, it's interesting because when I was at uni, we were introduced. So just listen to you there. Like, I tend to flirt with a lot of other tools. So it made me think that, I'm very experimental. But in fact, looking back now, I've only used it when I've been introduced to something. So prior to another tool, I only stuck with what I was told before.
Right.
Whereas your journey seems like it was more down to, it was very organic in terms of like, as long as it fulfilled the need that you were looking for or solve the problem, then you switched, as opposed to,
right.
Like basically, have you ever learned something, at least tool wise, based off FOMO?
Good question. There's definitely software that I tried that everyone was like swearing by because it's cool and whatever, but I think I always had pretty pragmatic approach. You could call it conservative approach to things, where I just don't see a point in changing unless it's merited for whatever reason. Like if I can see that the efficiency of the software is falling behind because other software is better, it's possibly that's better to switch. Sometimes it's better just to take a step back and switch and relearn things so that you can be more efficient later, right? And sort of that's what happened with me like with 3D, switching from 3ds Max to Blender, for instance, right? I don't want to shit on 3ds Max. It's still a great software, but there are clear, like I would say the entire software industry is falling behind Blender.
And definitely for like, I guess, concept art and concept design, Blender is the go-to, right?
Not only that, like I think animation, for instance, I just cannot see. I mean, okay, we can get to that, but some of the major issues with animation is that most animators work in Maya. It's incredibly difficult to find Blender animators, for instance. So if you're like hiring, I would say like maybe 2 years ago before AI. I think we should get to AI because that's like where things change dramatically. But I would wish there was more Blender animators to work with, because the Maya animators, they have like, a lot of them have like incredibly long experience in the industry, and there are incredible animators who work with Maya, right? But that's just a tool. They're just incredible animators, but that's just a tool that they use, right? And for them, I think Blender is still lacking in terms of like the animation. It's still very confusing. It feels like it has unnecessary amount of layers to, yeah, like it doesn't have like its own vision, or at least up until now, where the animation should be. And I know, just looking at the roadmaps, that they're fixing that. They're like actually working to progressively fix that. They're like one of the craziest thing I've seen is like the 3D onion skin, which is basically like, onion skin is basically like keyframe animation. Like when you do keyframe animation, it gives you like a kind of ghosting to know what the last frame was. So now you have that in 3D as well. You can do it on 3D models, not necessarily with this current release, but in the near future releases, which is like, for animation, this is crazy good, because like in the glance, you see exactly what you need to see, right? And then just like the kind of workflow and how they're simplifying the workflows, and how many integrations that software has with like different software. I think the number one thing that would make, I think, like if Blender had V-Ray or Corona, I mean, I feel like the entire industry would switch to that. You know what I mean? I think that's the only missing part. Like, I like cycles, but I mean, V-Ray is just still miles ahead in terms of like the quality of like the global illumination calculations. I mean, look, Unreal Engine is amazing too, but when you do a V-Ray render, like when you do it right, it's like, oh my God, I cannot believe how good the calculations are. Just sort of like how the global illumination and the realism is conveyed, and how the textures and your shader settings react to lighting. Like, there's only a handful of rendering software that does it, like, especially if you want to do like photorealism, that do it right. You can clearly tell the difference between V-Ray, let's say, and Redshift. Redshift is an amazing software, but like if you want to do like ultra realistic, photorealistic stuff, V-Ray is just way better. Like just the way it calculates shadows doesn't look like a toy, kind of thing, which is rapidly changing too. I think we should really get to AI, because that's where like everything becomes like, it's basically you're grabbing and tossing a table in the air with all the food flying. And it's like, fuck it. Like, what the hell?
Like you just said, like the key thing to all the software and everything else and all the tools that you use, and even workflow, keyword there is getting it right. Like, as long as you get it right, it's going to be great. Yeah.
Let me just add one thing, because the original question was like the traits that you need to have, or sort of like, what are like the number one or three most important things, or whatever, to be successful. Like, whether you want to be successful and all that stuff. So yeah, ability to kind of adapt and change. I would say that's number one. I think being like a good human, and sort of like leaving your ego behind the door when you enter the room. It's like a number two, I would say. So like, just, whatever is your like level of experience, and whatever is your level of ability and wealth, or any of those things, if you keep your ego in check, just people are going to like you, and you're going to be more likely to work with people later down the road. I would say some of the richest, like most rich people like multimillionaires that I've happened to meet, whether it was through working on the project together, or like randomly because of the shared interest that I got to have a conversation with them one time or another, or like working with like a high level directors or producers, or someone who's just like considered to be legendary in the industry, right? What struck me the most is that people I consider, vast majority of the people I would consider to be, this seems to be like an amazing person in terms of like what they are in the industry, they were also just so down to earth, regular as fuck, easy to talk. Hey, like I could just, hang out and play video games with you kind of personality, just no mention about, hey, I'm more rich than you. I'm better artist, or I'm better. Like, that's, to them, to like the highest achievers, seems like to be like the most petty petty thing. And like what's kind of interesting too is like when you like going back to YouTube, people who like brag about their wealth and brag about their ability oftentimes turn out to be grifters or fraud.
True.
They're just coping for something, right? And not always, but often, right? Mm-hmm. There are incredibly talented pieces of shit too. Like, like don't get me wrong.
That might be the title of this episode.
But yeah, like being down to earth is like just be nice to people. Like you never know what's gonna happen. Like someone who's someone who's your student that, you know, maybe is not great at what they're doing might be your employer in a couple of years. Like you fucking never know.
Yes. Yeah, true.
Very
true.
Life's crazy. So that's all I'm saying.
And it's cool. And all those things you mentioned, they're timeless. Like no software, well, unless AI decides what it wants to do, but put that to one side for a second. They're timeless qualities and they long stick to them, whatever your profession is. You should be okay. But yes, let's jump into AI. And it's interesting because today, the day we're recording, obviously the whole thing on ArtStation, there's been that massive protest and there's a lot of been discussion around the whole thing. Like me personally, I jumped into it, I think, early spring, and as a creative, my eyes lit up. And I'm sure it was for many creatives. And I think in creatives' hands, it's cool. But yeah.
What was your first exposure? Like, what's the first thing you saw that made you like, oh, I need to like check it out?
Vitali. So when he did something on there, like it depends who's putting it on there, because obviously you see
like the Mid-Journey stuff.
Yeah,
that he was
exactly.
Doing?
Like you see loads of stuff.
That was, I think, that was summer.
Okay, cool. And it was two reasons. He did it.
It's important because like spring and summer, it's like a leap.
Oh yeah, no, for sure.
From summer to now, it's a leap.
So just to even like go back a little bit, my only exposure to that before that was think Wamba, the app, which was like just super basic and just super like it's just like whatever for social media stuff, right? And I think that's all it ever was supposed to be for, just to make you look cool on social media, but it's exploded. But then seeing artists that I respect use it in a design capacity, I was like, okay, this is intriguing. And then using it how I generate assets or how what my workflow is, it fitted right into that. But then obviously a lot of other stuff, like you didn't know kind of how the sausage was made, so to speak. But yeah, like forget my thoughts, over to you, man. Talk to me about AI.
So for me, the very first time there were a couple of events. I think there was like 2020 or 2020 or maybe even 2019 or even earlier. Like I remember seeing obviously like the GAN, like the NVIDIA GAN, the generative, I think either generative adversarial networks or general adversarial networks. I can't remember exactly the translation of the acronym, but the idea is like you have two basically it's like two algorithms, you know, headbutting and figuring out who's going to win, and that those results kind of then go against each other again. And through doing that, you get results, and that have changed. That's sort of like, oh, that's such a past technology, you know. It's just like now it's like this the diffusion and stable diffusion models, they're just diffusion models in general. Mm-hmm. But the first time I've heard about it was like the GAN stuff. And then I can't remember exactly who I was talking with about this, but someone I was working with sent me a link to OpenAI and sort of like the first like white papers about image generation from like prompt to image. And that was 2019, I think. If I remember it correctly, that was 2019, where there was like just white paper of what, you know, what it's all about with some like very simple examples, an apple or orange or avocado chair or like whatever, right? Very simple. To me, I looked at that as like, this is kind of crazy and this could potentially be scary, but I'm curious like how quickly this is going to progress, right? Because I feel like even back then I felt like we're probably years away from this to be like actually useful one way or another.
Yeah.
And then like I think May or June like this year actually, is when it all kind of snuck up on everyone with like the release of like the beta for Midjourney, and then shortly after like the Stable Diffusion and OpenAI, DALL-E, and like it's crazy because the timeline is so compressed. It like you blink an eye and you missed out on something already.
Yeah.
It's very wild. And I remember the first I got into a Midjourney beta and saw like what people are doing on Discord. And I remember it was like right before me going on vacation. Like I was supposed to go on like a trip. And I'm like, this is like still kind of fuck. Like I should have just forgot about this thing and just don't touch it. But I ended up like spending half of my vacation time just on Discord, like experimenting with this thing. Because it was just so mind-boggling what it was producing. Like, and sort of like if you just dove, because okay, if you've used it for the first time and you just type in the prompt, the likelihood of the prompt creating something that looks good was almost zero. Like it just looked like shit, right? But then when you dove in and started like prompting even more and more, then you would figure out, oh, like it's actually like you actually have to like invest a little bit of like iteration time to get it to a place where it actually starts to look incredible. And some of the results were like, oh my God, like this is like if I spend an hour over painting this is like a keyframe for a movie.
Yeah.
Like a high quality keyframe for a movie. And to me, it was like really disturbing. And then like there was just other things happening where I was like focused on you know, animation and directing. So I set it aside. I wasn't like really following. I was still kind of paying attention to what's going on, but there weren't any major events that made me believe that this is going to go crazy or like really crazy, really fast, right? And that was up until recently because like I started seeing those like one of the major problems that the diffusion models had back then was that it was almost impossible to reproduce real like faces or human faces or like human models. It was just almost impossible. It just looked like shit. It looked like an AI stuff. And now it's like, wow. Like what in the hell, right?
Yeah.
And then yeah, it's wild how quickly those things progressed. And what made me really look, that was very, very recent, what made me really look into it was watching Steven Zapata's video. Obviously, that was like the first kind of video I stumbled upon. It was like, I think it was like a recommendation on YouTube even, which I thought was very insightful. And I you know, I just released a podcast with him, which we had like a 3-hour conversation about this. And I like to be very sort of like skeptical and cynical about things. I know believing in headlines is probably never a good idea. Like you have to read into things to actually understand them. But the more I started reading into what the Stable Diffusion does and how, you know, the data is collected, all that kind of stuff, was like, oh, whatever Steven was saying is like, it's not like he came up with just the headline and, you know, he actually did his research, because I did the same kind of dive, not as deep dive, but enough to understand, like, to make me believe that whatever he was saying is in good faith, a good information, right? At least in good faith. And then anytime you bring that subject, even in comments, people will correct you and like, hey, like you should probably read into this, because some people are like way more doing a deeper dive into the subject. I think what's important here, and I think why, look, what ArtStation was doing yesterday, I don't think that's going to last for long.
I agree.
People are going to keep posting their art and whatever. There's certain things that need to happen for this to change, like to change, but I don't think there's anything as an artist we can change significantly enough to stop it. Like there's just no, I don't think that's just gonna get stopped, because from listening to where AI is going in terms of programming, the number one thing that programmers are going to tell you is that they're going to basically make themselves obsolete first, which is true. You can go on ChatGPT, which is extremely limited version of GPT-3.
Mm-hmm.
And if you use if you go to GPT-3, you can go and sign up on OpenAI for GPT-3. Actually, something I want to try personally. That's still a limited data. That's sort of like capped, I think, on whatever was available in 2021, right? And then you have a GitHub Copilot, which is basically AI algorithms helping to write code. So when you get those things to consideration, let's put the AI art aside, like the diffusion models aside for a second. Like the AI, like the programmers themselves are basically putting themselves out of work as they are working on it. Like it's just already happening, to be honest. Like, because you can, in some instances, ask ChatGPT to write you a specific line of code. Like you could do it. It doesn't work all the time, but it does work with like some of the Blender stuff where you type, "Hey, can you write me a code to do this and this for Python, like a Python script?"
Wow.
And it will fucking work, right? You have to maybe like tweak it, but like it's much easier to tweak it with like the chat versus like learn Python to write those things yourself, right? So for me, 2023, let's say, being able to write your own tools for all your own scripts to solve certain technical problems with the software, I just don't see how this is not happening soon. Like it's definitely going to happen sooner or later, right? So like learning software, I mean, there's even an add-on, like I tried it, but it didn't work. But there was a video of someone actually made it work, which is like an add-on for Blender. It's called Jarvis, which is like the
Tony Stark.
for Tony Stark.
Yeah.
And you basically, it's like using Chat GPT prompts to make Blender do operations for you. And he was showing examples of like moving a cube in space based on the chat prompt, like automatically. Like you type in the prompt and it automatically makes things move or like duplicate and scatter and all that kind of stuff. Just you typing, doing those stuff. And that's just Chat GPT, which is like super limited version of GPT-3, which is, by the way, GPT-3 is old technology because GPT-4 is what they are focused on, right?
Wow.
So, and when you listen to people who actually are like the CEO, like Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, how he talks about where the future is going, it's like, it's so wild and it makes like zero sense to me. Like you're just like, it's easy to look at the AI, like stop AI art in the vacuum of AI art. But when you like actually expand your view, you realize it's like, it's not just art. It's literally everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so apparently, I don't know if it's true. This is something that I'm technically obviously trying to find the good sources to research about, but some of the smart programmers are saying that it doesn't really matter if because there's the whole issue of copyright and the style and whatever. It's like, it doesn't really matter because it's all about computing power. If you get enough computing power, then the algorithm will make enough iterations of something that people describe to look like something without having an image to be assigned to it. So let's say if you want to have, all the master's work, for instance, like public domain, basically, right? So you cannot copyright Mona Lisa. Basically, I mean, I don't know. Maybe Mona Lisa specifically is owned by someone who I don't know. I don't think you can. I think there is like I think for music it's the same, right?
Yeah.
I think it's like 100 years. After 100 years, it becomes a public domain or something. So there are certain works of art that are public domain. So everything that's like kind of painterly, we kind of learn from the masters anyways. And so the algorithm can learn on that too. It doesn't need to be Greg Rutkowski. Like it could be just, Rembrandt. and you cannot copyright Rembrandt. So so even if the data sets eventually, like even if the battle for let's limit the data sets, which is what music industry did, by the way, they made sure that, or they are making efforts towards making sure that the data sets that they're using for it is not using any copyright material, but you will still be able to I think the AI algorithms and the way they're written and the way they're progressing, like look at the last few months, and you expect that in like a year or two they're not going to be able to do that anyways. Like that's sort of like a wishful thinking, right? So I don't think there's a stopping to that. It's basically like science fiction to think what's the future is going to bring. But when you mentioned about like the motivation, like right in the beginning, that's why I want to like note that that's important, because that's something that Steve mentioned that kind of stuck in my mind. I was thinking about it for a long time since then, is that, you know, if you're already lacking motivation to learn things that are readily available for you, it's like, imagine what is going to make you feel like if you're trying to learn something and you're at the stage of like, let's say I'm learning digital art, and I'm at the stage at which, you know, my art doesn't look good because I just don't have enough sort of like work hours and experience to make it look good. And the fucking AI does 10 times better job already in matter of months, right? So if that's not fucking destroying your motivation, I don't know what else will. You know, so I think in sort of a world like this, you have to be extra motivated to like find your pathway through life, let's say, right? Now, everything from this point on is like literally speculation, because some people say that, you know, maybe traditional art is the way to go. Some people say that that's going to displace artists from working in production. You know, it's really hard to say. There are certain things that I know are happening. So, for instance, something I've learned, and I need to research, but again, something I've learned from reading comments, that the new version of Lion, which is the Lion data set, that basically all of the diffusion algorithms are using that data set. So basically, it's images with prompts. It's like what 12, like 5 or 12 billion images crawled like through the common crawl from the internet, and then there's like sets of text that describes the image that is attached to images, and then there are like weights on words that basically say, okay, if it's a frog, then the frog is in the photo and the frog is in the word that describes the photo. The weight on the frog will be 10 out of 10.
Got it.
And then, like, you know, what's the most important part of the image? So it's basically like putting weights on words to describe the image in what significant parts of the description signifies the image. So like you can imagine, like maybe there's like image that has a frog, but the frog is smaller and there's more bushes and plants. It's more about like the environment. The frog is going to be 3 instead of 10, right? But you have a collection of 5 billion of those, and all of them are described, and all of them have weights. I think it's called CLIP, based like a CLIP technology or algorithm that basically weights everything and connects like wires of words and you know, weights. So all the algorithm does is kind of like looks at your prompt that you're typing, and it assumes kind of weights it's going to go with. You know, what's the most important weight of what you're trying to find. And interestingly, what I found out is just the way this basically works is like the denoising software. Like you basically start with like fully noised. There's no image, just a noise, picture of noise. And because noise is random, which creates a seed. And so like let's say if your seed is 2000, anytime you're going to have the image that has a seed 2000, it's going to always be the same. It's always the same seed, right? And then what it does is basically you type in your prompt, and it's trying to denoise based on weights from the noise image based on the seed, and predict what image is going to be. It's like a prediction of looking at the database of like all of the frog images based on weights, and then predicting where in this sea of noise are we going, the algorithm is going to shape that frog, basically, right? So that's basically what it does. And it's just going to get better and better. And it's just so incredibly difficult to predict. And I mean, but what I was getting at, sorry, I'm kind of went off tangent to explain what it is, but I was reading this article that the Copyright Office actually denied copyright to a comic book that was completely made in AI, saying that you cannot copyright. I'm going to paraphrase. You can definitely find this if you Google this. You cannot copyright something that was entirely made by machine. Which, if you take a logical extrapolation, and I'm going to say this because I work in the film industry and I understand the industry enough, I've dealt with enough lawyers to understand it enough, is that Disney, for instance, or any other company, like whether it's a Disney, Apple, Warner Brothers, you name it, all of them have lawyers. And when you work in like a film production, anytime they want to like release an art book or any like official release of your art, you bet your ass the lawyer is going to reach out to make sure that doesn't have any copyright material in it. Mm-hmm. Because the last thing they want to have on their hands is lawsuits based on copyright. So is it a good idea for a studio to use material that is almost, the cost of it is almost zero, right? But they have no copyright claim over it? Like, I don't know the answer to that question. And until there's like a legal precedent, which if Copyright Office sticks to it, it will be a legal precedent, right? Mm-hmm. Then we might find the answer, but it's so difficult to predict. And also, like, I think the Lion, I was reading this, I need to check. I'm really curious. I think Lion database is open source. You can actually go dive in and check it yourself. But apparently the new set is actually progressively removing copyright material because they don't even though they're like nonprofit organization, they're still, the money that goes into the nonprofit goes from the companies like OpenAI and I think like a Stable Diffusion, And so they just don't want to be tangled in lawsuits either. So they're going to start removing. And anecdotally, I have friends who play with Midjourney and they say like the new Midjourney is worse. It's like more cookie cutter than the previous version was. And it seems like it's lacking something, right? Mm-hmm. So you can clearly see where this could go, at least in the current generation, where non-copyright material is going to make it worse for now until, let's say, Disney or Apple or any other company that have a ton of content, they'll create their own data set. And the algorithm is going to be so well written to interpret that data set that let's say if you are working at Pixar, let's just say you're working at Pixar and Pixar and Disney has a database of all the Pixar movies and you want to design Toy Story 6 and you want to have matte paintings or concept art of something that looks like Toy Story. Like it's just purely like this is Toy Story like 101 in terms of like shapes and colors and everything. If the diffusion model can, create, is like so good at interpreting and is trained on the data of the Toy Story and is like can understand everything about it, then why would you hire an illustrator? Mm-hmm. You will hire someone who maybe understands illustration enough, or like maybe the illustrator is going to be more of like an art director of their own sort of work, I don't fucking know. Like it's so hard to predict, right? But then there's also like the derivative part. Like what if you use AI to create images and then and then you augmented it by painting over. Like once you do that, it's not purely machine work anymore. Technically, you can copyright it then because it's a derivative of machine work, and it's basically like using references. There's going to be a lot of legal battles about this. I'm very curious where it's going to go. I don't think things are going to stay the way they are right now. I don't think it's possible. I don't think any of the big studios or any big companies will look at an opportunity of saving millions of dollars in production to not figure that out, because over a span of 10 years, that's billions of dollars of savings, right? And maybe it's worth to invest $1 billion into, getting your own data set that's going to be amazing, but then you're saving $4 billion because you're just hiring way less labor. Or maybe you're hiring the same amount of labor, but you're producing 100x content. But then what happens if, and you can already see that's happening with animation and film. I mean, it's we're not far from you being able to just prompt your own film in a way, right?
Yep.
I think that's going to happen, obviously.
Yeah.
What if everyone can make a movie? Why would you go to watch a movie in the theater if AI can make a perfect movie for you?
And that right there is a completely new world of consumerism. Even like that's something that we've never experienced before. Like obviously we've all it's almost like a fan art feature, and everything is just purely revolves around your own vision of what you want it to be, which is just, for me, that just sounds like I can't fathom it because I have no experience of it, and I've never really, there's just no nothing to compare it to and compare it against.
I think the worst thing you can do, sorry, I'm going to interrupt.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
But I think the worst thing you can do now with all of that's happening is to not pay attention to it.
For sure.
Just bury your head. I'm an artist. I just want to focus on my art. Don't do that. Like pay attention. Like even if you're not changing anything in terms of, your workflows and whether you want to learn this or not, at least pay attention. Like know what's going on. Like really spend some time to know what's going on, because you don't want this to sneak up even more where it's like, well, I'm out of job now. Like, I don't know if that's going to happen. I feel like there's so many different scenarios of where things could go. If it's affecting, if this technology and it will, and it already does, and it's same with robotics. Like, look, there's a semi that Tesla is releasing, which is going to displace so many truck drivers and whatever, right? Over time, that's going to be a huge legal battle everywhere. And I bet your ass every industry is going to go lawyer up to the 10th degree with this, and you're going to have lawyers battling over this in next coming years, because it's basically AI it's a blue ocean area. It's basically anything goes. And one of the interesting comments I've heard, and I've heard it from the All In podcast, was what they say is that it's a blue ocean, and you bet your ass there's going to be so much scam, and it's going to implode on itself, and it's going to turn into something we don't even know, and it's going to be a shitload of regulations because of it, because a lot of people will get ultra rich from this, and a lot of people will lose a ton of money because of this, because they're going to get scammed. So AI scamming, it's coming. And now you don't even know if it's true or not. Like, it's hard to tell.
And
actually, ironically, on this topic, like knowing what's true or what isn't, you already cannot tell. Like, if so, like the YouTubers are making intros from ChatGPT and then saying that they made intro from ChatGPT, and like it sounded exactly like you would say it. Like, holy fuck. But something that literally happened overnight, like literally yesterday, like the news broke last night, literally, is that China is basically forcing everyone to use, if you're using any kind of AI, whether it's like the deep fake or anything that any media created with AI has to be watermarked as AI creation. And there's like a huge punishment if you don't do that. And it's kind of ironic that China is like the first country that is actually being the most progressive about it. And it kind of should be a telltale where the things are going, right? And where the perception should be. Another interesting comment that I've heard about AI in general, and again, I want to talk about this in more of sort of like a bird's eye view rather than like focusing on AI art specifically, because I think everything. Look, there's so much information about AI art already. I would just be repeating someone else's words because I don't know much. I know something. I don't know enough to like be really, really, really informed. I'm still learning. But I was listening to, that was a podcast or like a panel that Sam Altman, who's the CEO of OpenAI, which I think they got like $20 billion in VC funding this year, which is some fucking insane numbers, right? But he had a very interesting, like more macro point of view, where it's like, generally speaking, with AI, the government's gonna have a hard nut to crack because they cannot do it in the typical capitalist way where 1% of the most kind of focused, driven, entrepreneurial people gonna take it all, because society is just not gonna fucking take it. It's like if only certain amount of people can benefit from the excess, almost free life, let's say, abundance, because like if you consider AI taking over intelligence, the amount of intelligence that needs to go to computing and needs to go to like production and all, like AI solving production issues, making things way cheaper or almost zero, like fully efficient, net positive, whatever. You can imagine that this could lead to a place where there's going to be abundance of resources, and who's going to take that, right? So are we going to have like a basic income that everyone could like live comfortably and then just have fun? And who's going to take more money? Is even money going to be that important if everything is free? Like another, this is the craziest news I've read in like years, is that, you've heard about US working on the fusion, like the nuclear fusion models for energy. And it was just broke the news yesterday that I think for the first time, or like a couple of days ago maybe, that they actually reached net positive energy gain from like shooting laser beams.
Yeah.
So like they gain more energy than they've spent, which means, well, we might have like cold fusion in our lifetime, which means free energy. And free energy means free everything, basically, right?
True.
Because there's no energy cost of production then. Obviously, and then we'll see a lot of wars on where the minerals are.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So it's not a utopia. Everyone who's saying that we're gonna have a utopia in 10 years because of AI and fusion energy and those things, like that's not gonna happen. Because I bet your ass, like, there's gonna be wars fought over resources to make those things progress faster because they're so significant, right?
Exactly.
But you would have to think, like, if AI is about, let's say, if AI progresses so fast that it becomes so cheap for production and it displaces the vast majority of labor and production becomes cheap, well, first of all, everything will become cheaper then. Like, that's just needs to, right? But do you think, like, if 80% of humanity suddenly couldn't work, they're just gonna sit on their ass and do nothing? Like, French Revolution was, started for something significantly smaller than that, right? So, and you have riots and things like that going on for way less significant things, where people just go on the street and it's like, I'm not gonna fucking take this anymore. People riot over people like the current protests in China over the COVID restrictions, for instance, like it literally made the government, I mean, I'm pretty sure a lot of it was political. I don't know enough, but it's kind of curious that they had those massive protests about the zero COVID policy, for instance, and then that stopped like a week after, right? So masses, like no matter if the government has, guns or not, like if 90% of a population goes on the street, you're fucked. Like that's where heads roll, right? So I'll be really, really, really curious where it's all going because it's just like it's impossible to predict. And I would say like the only thing you can do is just like really pay attention to what's going on. I'm really curious what it's going to do to learning and teaching too.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's an argument to say where, well, the real art's still going to matter because you might want to like value the stuff that's been done in an analog way, that there's some craftsmanship going into it. But I think it's delusional to assume that that's going to save art because there's a vast majority of artists who are not on the level of working with big production studios. Maybe they're like Fiverr artists or, you're working on commissions and doing like, simple art, more like simplistic art, but it still kind of makes you a living, like everything matters. And I feel really worried that those are the first jobs that are going to go. Same with like copywriting and GPT-3 or any kind of writing in that matter, And then how are you going to distinguish what's real or what isn't? Like, okay, you go on ArtStation, you say no to AI art. A year from now, someone will produce an artwork with AI that's going to look, you can even actually train your own model right now, like your own stable diffusion based on your own art and make your own model. And then it's going to make art that looks like yours. And so art, if the diffusion algorithm becomes so good that it's going to be indistinguishable between what you would draw by hand versus what you're going to do by prompt, is that gonna, if you post that on ArtStation, who's gonna know? And if you want to hide the name of the file or see their prompt, like fucking run it through like a noise filter and then copy paste to like a new document if you want to be that crazy. And who's gonna know, right? Like it's just so weird, unfathomable, and like I don't know. It's I'm like battling in my head with where those things go. And to be frankly honest, like I think like I'm right in the middle in terms of the amount of positivity it's going to bring, because you just cannot predict what kind of positive consequences it's going to have too. Like think about like medical screening and diseases. Like if that becomes automated to a point where it's almost has zero cost, let's say, then your health and making right health decisions is going to be cheaper, and those things are going to be cheaper. If energy becomes cheap or free, then you don't pay for gas, you don't pay for electricity, you can drive your car for free. It's like, do you even need a car? You can, like, it's just like so many things can go right, and then also so many things can go wrong. It's just like impossible to predict. So I don't even want to go there. Like people like some people are like ultra positive and say that that's the best thing that's going to happen in the world. Some people are like like this is a doomsday. We're all fucked. I don't think it's either. I think so. It's somewhere in the middle, and you just need to like be vigilant and navigate through and just like really pay attention, because I don't know, it could be very interesting to where things are going to go. I think definitely like short term, there's going to be some displacement for sure. But on the other hand, like if you're making your own movies or your own content, you might as well find that that's very profitable for you. Who knows? Because what if what if you just have amazing ideas, but maybe you just are not good at drawing and animation, all those things. Like if you ask, let's say, Quentin Tarantino to basically act and film and set up lighting and do all of those things that visual effects and everything in his films, he'll be like, no, fuck off. That's not my job, right? So yeah, it's gonna be very interesting.
Yeah, it's pretty clear that it's going to be, at the very least, disruptive. At the very most, just a complete shift and change to something that's very alien to what we're used to now. One of the, I guess, the solutions or possibilities is, you touched upon it there as well, is maybe everyone's just going to end up focusing on their own stuff. And obviously some people don't want to, some people want to work on other things and work for productions and, like things they're fans of, etc., etc. But then at the same time, some people are like, well, I've got ideas, I've got visions, I've got things I want to create, and now I don't need $1 billion to make something. I can do it just for the sake of doing it with these tools.
Right.
So maybe that's where it's headed. But then even for yourself right now, and this could be the last topic before we wrap up, is that's something you're doing right now. Like, we've spoken about your career, we've spoken about this crazy thing that AI is, and you've had a lot of changes throughout, you've had a lot of adaptations throughout, and one thing you've used quite frequently is adapting and navigating. And I'm sure you're still like a working artist right now in terms of working for productions, etc. But you're also developing your own universe, your own production. And something that also hit the news recently was something that was 6.9 million reasons why you could be doing more of that as well. So yeah, I'd love to talk about that. Like, does that affect that venture and that pursuit in any way?
Cool. Let me prefix that. When I mentioned Blue Ocean for AI and sort of how it's going to go into like the scam territory and then burst, I want to say the same thing basically already happened with crypto and Web3. I remember, because this is important to sort of like set the conversation. I remember like the first time I've heard about NFTs and Web3, generally speaking, like the promise of what it is and what it would have become was vastly different than what it have become. And over time, it's just gone worse and worse, because the unfortunate reality of something that is truly novel and innovative and potentially significantly altering the way we interface with internet has amazing potential to be also fraudulent on so many occasions. Like, I don't even have to say that. Like, if you hear crypto, you know exactly what's happening. Like, it's just fucking crazy how much scam this environment has gone through, and it's still alive. I'm like surprised. To me, that NFT, like the promise of it was different than what it is now. But I think the underlying structure of it still has, in my opinion, not only merit, but that's where the things are going to go, whether you like it or not. Like, I consider Web3 movement and crypto in general to be basically a .com of early 90s. When the .com happened, there was hundreds of businesses that were having crazy valuation, that were worth billions, like not billions, millions back then, millions of dollars. You would have a .com address of a business that was like worth millions, that was not making any money. And half of that, like 80% of them were scams. 99% of them went to zero, basically. And the headlines were internet is dead. Literally what it was, right? Internet was a FUD. It's dead. That were like literally New York Times headlines in 91 or 92. And is internet dead, or is it like you cannot live with internet anymore? Like,
Exactly.
where are we today, right?
Yeah.
So Web3 is the same. And the reason I'm saying this is because it's not about the NFTs or, the price go up, or the shitcoin or Ethereum or Bitcoin. I think that's noise. I also think people who believe that Ethereum or Bitcoin or any of those coins are going to like displace the government because we want to be true anarchists and free. Dude, the government has B-2 bombers. Like, shut the fuck up, okay? If they want to regulate it, they will regulate it. Like, and it's already happening, which it will happen. Unfortunate reality is it, because of the bad players in this business. It, like, the stain of what it is just horrible, and also just like it's probably going to get over regulated to stifle the rate of progression where this could go as a really genuinely, web altering, technology. Because you have to think about it from like couple of different ways. I would say the number one thing is the decentralization of storage, right? So basically, let's say you're an artist, right? And by the way, this is not something that's already figured out. It's like I would say it's in its infancy. And it's only going to get better over time because more smart people, and like most of the smart people, look, half of the Silicon Valley left Silicon Valley to work in Web3.
Right.
Like that will amount to something over time, right? Those are like the smartest people who created Uber and Facebook and Instagram and whatever, right? And so, like, if you look at it from a perspective of storage, just the conversation I recently had with Joshua Davis, it's like, if you're an artist, if you like store your artwork on, like, let's say ArtStation and DeviantArt and Google and whatever, like, all it takes is just like, the hard drive goes dead or the service shut down, and then it's gone. Like, it doesn't exist. It's just gone, right? And if you're gone, you're sort of like, you are gone, especially with digital art. Because like traditional art, I still have hard copies until they get like completely destroyed, but at least it's like more tangible, right? So that's number one thing, like the storage issue. Like, if you can decentralize the storage issue, meaning like it doesn't live on one server, but it lives on a network that is sharing sort of its computing, and it's sharing, like, if 99% of computers go dark, the 1% will still run it so you can still see the image, right? It's sort of what, I guess, like, if you could go back in time and peer-to-peer sort of like downloading torrents was, right? Like, the more computers, the faster it is. Like, this sort of like the infancy of decentralization in a way. So if you look at it from the storage perspective, it's like it brings a solution to store things forever, technically speaking, right? Unless there is a significant shift in terms of what computing even means, then, or catastrophic event and the restart of civilization, which is by its own merit something completely different. But the storage aspect of it, that if that's not if that's not a significant thing already, then I don't know what is, right? Because you can store your work on, like, let's say like you can use, say, Amazon servers to store whatever you're doing. You can use like different services, whereas ArtStation have different accounts and whatever. What if you lose access to your account? What if someone hacks it and you forget your password? What if your hard drive fails and you don't have a backup? Like, those kind of things happen all the time. There's so much work I've lost because of failed hard drives, and there's so many like issues with storing in like centralized places, because you never know if they're gonna be there or not. Like, look, CG Hub was one of the biggest art forums back in like what early 2010s, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then overnight disappeared, gone.
Yep.
Every work you put, like if you only had your work on CG Hub and you forgot to like back up it somewhere else because like, oh, it's like a good place to store it, like you lost it all. Like what the fuck? And I'm not saying like, look, maybe the storage solution is going to be, maybe there's going to be another technology that's going to solve it even in a better way, but that's just one aspect, right? Another aspect is we all talk about privacy, and I think that privacy is going to matter even more, and like protecting your data when it comes to AI specifically, because like you if you can protect your privacy by having some kind of, you know, digital receipt that is related to it, then you can more easily program things to sort of like piggyback to where they are in the provenance, right? So right now, the way the things work on the web 2 is if you want to post on Twitter, you have to make an account on Twitter. If you want to post on Instagram, you have to make an account on Instagram. If you want to post on Facebook or any other places, you need to make an account. If you want to buy stuff from CG Trader, you need to make an account, you know? And how many times you read about data breaches and your phone numbers, addresses that you put in, credit card number, info, all of those things are getting hacked from the like centralized servers and leaked to like dark web or, you know, publicly or whatever. So that's the issue when you're creating an account. You're like giving away your data for free and in hopes that the sort of whoever is in custody of that account will, you know, will not get hacked or not sell your data, because that's another thing. Like those companies literally sell your data to advertisers. You know, that's what they make money on mostly, right? I mean, like Facebook and social media made fucking gazillions of dollars on selling data. Like if you don't believe that, as like you're naive, right? And then like you sign up for an account and you give your phone number, and then you fucking like your phone rings every day with spam calls because they sold it to like some advertising company that just sells it to like another advertising company that sells it to like some scammy business that asks you about your car insurance.
Yep.
The extended warranty meme. It's like, bro, like it just like goes out of hand, you know? So that's a major issue because, and then like you have password issues, like you have to create passwords and you get your password can get hacked, all those things. There's just so many issues with the way like it works, but it has tons of issues. And there's millions upon millions of dollars spent in security, making sure that those things are secure and whatever. The change that Web3 introduces is that you don't create accounts anymore. You have your own wallet, right? Whether it's a wallet, however you're going to call it, you have your own sort of like IP address. That's you in the internet. And you can create as many as you want. But generally speaking, if you want to, let's say, have benefits of, you know, get it, like, let's say you want to get discounts based on how many times you bought something from Amazon and you do it through your wallet, the Amazon will automatically know how many times you bought things from the data on like the historical on-chain data of your wallet. And then, you know, and then it will know, okay, we'll give you a discount because you're like a customer, right? But the main thing is you are connecting with your wallet and it's you, and you don't have to enter any password. It's only your like, it's a seed phrase or whatever, like however secure it is. I'm pretty sure there's like a huge amount of work that needs to be done in terms of the security of your own wallet, which is vastly easier to do it on one end versus you trying to make every single place you're logging into secure, right? Yes. So that's another thing where it's just like, okay, now I have my own kind of one password, one login kind of entry. And if I don't want to be there, I just disconnect from there. And I'm not there. They don't have my data. I control what kind of data I want to share with them. I control whether they can look into my wallet, where they can see my traffic, where they can see my name, my phone number, any of those things, right? Maybe there are some services that are going to be requiring you to have a phone number, or like give, like if you're creating a bank account, you're going to need to give your address, all that kind of stuff. But what if it's all in your wallet, where it's like it's in one place, that it's only yours and you have full control over it? And you can still use those services. They can still provide you the same service. It's just like they don't have an account. You don't have an account. And that makes the major difference. On this even small scale, like decision making, and then figuring out what your fans are the most excited about at what you do, that could be helpful in creative processes. But then like scale it up to 100x, let's say, and figure out, okay, let's say if Disney wants to make another Star Wars movies without making it to be a fucking complete flop, because like there's just so many movies that just didn't work out. And there's many reasons why movies don't work out. Oftentimes it's just not listening to the audience, and look what happens. I think the Andor series that they've released is apparently amazing. And it might be because they're listening to their audience, The video games examples there's just so many video games examples where the game studio will make a game that is incredibly successful. Then they'll make a sequel, not listen to the audience, what they like. And then it flops because audience like, fuck this, I'm going to play it. And then they make another one that's like coming back to the roots and everyone loves it and it's success, right? Like that just happens all the time. Another example is like the Deadpool movie. Like none of the studio executives wanted to make that movie until, there was this famous story of Ryan Reynolds like leaking the sort of the little short that they've done with Blur Studio, and everyone's like freaking out. Oh my God, this is the Deadpool. Like I want to see the studio saw like the audience reactions. Like, well, fuck yeah, let's make it happen. So imagine you want to make a next movie as a big studio, and like, where do you find your fan base? Is it on Reddit? Is it on this? Like, where is it? Like, but now let's say in the world of Web3, where you have those wallet addresses that engage with the show. Like, let's say if you go to the movie theater and you buy a ticket to see the movie with your wallet address that has like currency to support it. Let's say if it's like a USD, like US, let's say USA, like if there's a dollar that's like a digital currency dollar, right? Or if it's a Bitcoin or whatever, like government, like, by the way, every government's going to have their own digital currency.
Yeah,
like
sure.
the paper currency is gone. Like that's the thing of the past. So like, even if you don't believe in crypto, like not crypto, but Web3 specifically, or crypto, we're going to have government crypto. Like, fucking, it's happening already. Like China is doing it already. Everyone's going to do it. It's just like so much more energy efficient to do that too. Mm-hmm. Either way, like if you go buy tickets and you saw the movie like 10 times, and then like, studios like to do, and like, hey, like what if we do like a fan meetup, like the biggest fans of the movies, right? We want to invite them for like a tour of the studio. All they go is like, let's look up the wallets that bought most tickets, and reach out to those people. It's like, and then you have like almost like a sycophants of the show. Like, oh my God, like they're gonna be so excited, So I just see so many things, like positive things about this, where this could go, which makes me really, really excited. And I think it's, although what's happening in the crypto industry is kind of like crazy, where you hear like about the FTX, like it's just so mind-boggling how scammy it became, right? Like there's just so many bad players, but obviously there's a regulation coming in, and out of all this mess, there's going to be 1% of the companies that have a vision and they want to try to do something cool. And perhaps they're going to be successful, perhaps not. So it's a gamble. I don't know. Like what we're trying to do, maybe it's going to be successful or not. Like I have no fucking clue. Like honestly, all I can do is just like, all we can do is just to try, right? See if that concept sticks. If it doesn't, it doesn't. If it does. Clearly there are some venture capitalists that believe in it, because otherwise they wouldn't invest. So let's see what happens. Very curious.
I think not only is it curious, it's super exciting on many levels. And like, just before I get into that a little bit, like, I mean, you just mentioned there, especially with the crypto space and all this that's been happening, there's like, it's almost, I guess in some aspects of it, and what people thought it was is imploding almost to a certain extent. But at the same time, do you think that this would exist at all? Or at least in this form, if the crypto space did not exist?
You mean, I'm not sure if I understand the question.
No,
sorry.
Shibuya. So the platform, I guess.
Oh,
Like, you know, like,
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't think so. I mean, there are Web2 solutions for that already. So that's not. It's like are we trying to compete with Patreon then? Like that's not exactly what this is supposed to be. You know, there's just the technology itself. The again, like I prefix this with the idea of A, storage, B, decentralization of decision making, and C, the fact that you own, like you are in ownership of your own decisions in a way, right? Because you own your wallet and you decide where to log in or whatever. Like those are such a significant kind of aspects of it that, you know, I don't think I don't think it can be replicated in the current form. Like, can you imagine a world in which you can use you can use your Google account to sign into multiple places, but not everywhere. Yeah. And also you're still with Google. If Google shut down your account, you're fucked. Like basically you're locked out. Yes. Also, like, can you imagine you can kind of take your Twitter account data and just punch it into Facebook and assume you're going to log in. That's just not going to happen, right? So that just by itself is so significant that I don't think it is. And look, there's always a possibility that someone can prove me wrong. Like, you know, obviously I'm not the smartest person on earth either. I'm like, I just believe in something that has a potential and I want to try it. And I'm gonna kind of like loop it back a little bit to AI because this is something I mentioned when I was talking to Steve. It's like, I think if you're worried about AI, I think people should look into crypto. No, and Web3, like Web3, like it's just like saying crypto. It's almost like because of the FTX and all those things. Like or almost like you're saying a bad word. You know,
it's like saying best 3D back in the day.
I totally understand why. It's just like, you know, I'm pretty sure the web.com was the same thing back in the 90s. Like when you said .com, people were like, ooh, whatever. Mm-hmm. It's gonna go like, look, let's be very cynical. The next time Bitcoin starts to go to the moon, everyone's going to be praising crypto to be the best thing ever. Yeah. Okay. Like, let's just not beat around the bush. It's all about money at the end of the day. Like, people have their opinions because they either made a lot of money or lost a lot of money. And there's no really much of a nuance around it, which is very frustrating because it doesn't progress the discussion any further. But even if you look at the NFTs, I mean, come on, man, there's just so many projects that were scammy and shitty. But think about it from the artist perspective. If you like, let's say if AI is going to be a thing and you want to preserve your authenticity, and if there is a world in which authenticity matters, then how are you going to prove that what you've created is you, specifically you, and you were the first one to do it, right? What's the best way to do it right now, unless there's a new emerging technology that's going to be created? I mean, look, AI, you can probably in 10 years or whatever, go into Chat GPT and type in, create a new emerging technology that will solve problem A, and it's going to make $1 trillion company. Like, that's totally possible too, right? Because it's going to be so much smarter. But let's say with realistic look, what's happening right now, like, if you create an artwork, let's say, or an animation or whatever, and the first place that this artwork is going to appear on is your wallet, then you have undisputable proof that cannot be hacked, because there's nothing that, like, the blockchain, you cannot hack the blockchain. Like, once it's in the blockchain, it's in the blockchain. Like to hack a blockchain, it would mean you would have to like completely destroy the blockchain, basically, right? Once you quote unquote mint your artwork, let's say on Ethereum network, for instance, right? You have a definite proof and a receipt that it's yours. And it goes back to your provenance, your name. And anyone can copy it, sure. But on the blockchain, you were the first to make it. It's yours. So let's say in the world where it's going to be considered that copyright is a very important thing, and you cannot copy someone else's work and make an AI out of it or whatever. Now you have a proof that's yours. And you go to court, you don't have to provide receipts. You just show your wallets. Like, boom, there it is. It was minted on January 1st, 2023. I was the first one to ever minted it. It's mine because I made it. It's never been posted anywhere else. So it's mine. Like, what else do you like? I don't need to prove anything else. Like, it's literally as plain as simple as it can get, right? So now, like, what if there's regulations that require that artists get compensated if their work is used by AI algorithms? How is that going to be facilitated? Like, in the current way, like, are those companies going to reach out to artists specifically to sign contracts or whatever? I don't think that's efficient at all. That's why you have smart contracts on those blockchain networks, in which you can create a smart contract that decides automatically that, hey, you are allowing access for the algorithm to use your work, let's say. But the smart contract says that every time there's a prompt, there's a fraction of a percent that you're going to get in royalties, which is like similar in a way that Spotify does with the music, right? Like you get a fraction for each time it's played. So maybe that's not a lot of money, but at least it's not like indiscriminately used without your permission, in a way, you know. And at least you have some kind of control, and you can like just, hey, you know what? I don't see any benefits from this. I'm not getting any money. Fucking plug it away. AI cannot use it anymore. Fuck it. You know. So that's where I see, like, if in like the best world, if those things could happen, that's where I see these things could go. All of the other things, like the shit coins and Ethereum goes to moon, all of those. It's like, look, I've dabbled in, like, personally dabbled in cryptocurrencies just to know how it works. I've never like invested in anything, to be honest. I minted my own NFTs, obviously, but I just try to look beyond that. You know, to me, it's almost like a stepping stone.
Mm-hmm.
I think it matters because it's a very important technology. It, you know, me minting stuff on the blockchain, at least whether it's going to work out, whether, because look, tomorrow we can hear that government's going to regulate the crypto business out of business completely, and then it's game over for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Who knows? But at least I have sort of like a stamp in time that I exist on the blockchain, that my name is there, and there's a certain amount of art that I've created that whether released through, like, you know, we did the collaboration with Steve Aoki, with a lot of people, Steve Aoki's fan, loving the work and engaging in his community. I did several like one-of-ones myself through the auction houses like Christie's and all those places that we did the auction through Christie's last year. No, actually it was this year, for the MAPS organization, which is the psychedelics research for PTSD and that kind of stuff. So we did like a charity event, and all of those things felt to me like were the right use of the technology, let's say, right? I never went into like, oh, I got to make my PFP project, 10,000 monkeys or whatever. Like, to me, that's sort of like, it's so speculative. It's just not my thing, to be honest. You know, I was thinking about it, but it's just like, it's just, I don't know. It's weird. It's just not, it didn't feel like the right use what I think is the right use of the technology in a way. So,
and perhaps even for your creativity as well. At least what
right.
Shibuya is, it's still tapping into those creative juices, right?
Right. You know, you have those 10,000 PFP projects that make a lot of money, and then you look at the roadmap and they say, eventually we're going to make an animation. It's like, how about we just make animation?
Yeah, man.
How about we make something that as a filmmakers we would make anyways?
And it's something
Kind of
cool as
approach.
well. Like before the whole disruption of AI and all that kind of stuff, a lot of the stuff, I guess, not a trend that I could see, but you could see it happening more and more, is artists hiring other artists or producing kind of like platforms that you guys have to enable other artists to do stuff that's more tapped into their own visions. Like I think
Right.
Ben Moro is a great example. He's hiring fellow artists to help him with Huxley and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And whereas, let's say 5 years before, 10 years before, the only people that would be hiring is a studio. So I think that's a beautiful like evolution of the community and the industry in general. So like that's also,
You know,
encouraging as
unironically,
well.
I'm just going to say this,
Yeah.
unironically, the most interesting NFT or blockchain projects that I've seen that actually gave me any interest, like I was actually, oh, this is really interesting at all, were literally projects that were either made by friends or like, I know this is a person who works in the industry and they understand what production is and they understand what needs to go into like making this stuff to be actually valuable. Because like, I don't want to throw shade on anybody or anything, obviously. And, you know, people see value where they see value. Art is very subjective. I just personally don't see a value in you know, in something that can be generated by anyone.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So it's like, to me, I have a sort of like a certain threshold at which I feel like this is art and this is really is like, okay, you can argue it's art, but it really isn't, you know? It's not something like, the JPEG you made, I wouldn't pay $10,000 for it, or 20 or $1 million. Mm-hmm. By the way, all of those crazy valuations, it's like it was like a gold rush.
Yeah, for sure.
Back then, right?
Yeah.
It's skewing the whole perspective on everything because legit, most of the artists, they just like, it almost became like what YouTube or Patreon or any of those extra things has became like. There are artists that I know that are like working really hard, and blockchain made it so that they actually can make a living. They can make money and like make a decent living from selling their art as NFTs. And I mean, are you gonna just shit on them because they're trying to make a living being an artist? Like, come on, man! Like that's not that's not how this should work, right? And this sort of like the backlash that was back then, in terms of like, oh, artists doing NFTs are like horrible because now they want to make royalties from like, no, man, like, don't you think that if you made something, like even galleries, like the traditional galleries, the way things work for the most part, I think it's even like codified in the law. I would have to look it up, obviously, to confirm. But from what I was made aware of, if you sell your art in the gallery and someone else buys it, technically they owe you royalties, you know, at this, like at the secondary sales. So this is sort of like what's supposed to be, it was like the holy grail of the whole, you know, why NFTs matter for digital artists. And I think everyone was like super excited. And then it just got, you know, battered by so many scammy projects. Like how many stories you've heard of artists like working on a project that turned out to be like a rug pull, and they were like, what the fuck? Like I thought we were making something cool. Mm-hmm. And it's just like another testament, just sort of like try to do your research and be like vigilant what you're doing and where you're going. But that's like, that could be its own separate podcast, man. Like it's just such a long,
dude,
you know, needless to say, I think the technology, the underlying technology, and sort of the belief in what Web3 is supposed to be, I think is there. I'm not the only one who thinks that. Like, whether you like Gary Vee, for instance, or not, he right at the beginning said that 99.9% of the project is going to go to zero. And he was right. And that's exactly what's happening. And that's happening to every single industry, you know, throughout our lifetime. Every significant industry goes through like this unregulated Wild West. Let's shoot guns everywhere. Inviting, oh, there's money in it. Like I can fucking scam everybody. Like that's those kind of people come in, frauds and, you know, grifters and posers. And then it all collapses. Everyone flees. A lot of people get burned believing grifters basically. And then no, it sparks something that becomes your next Uber or your next Facebook, you know? It's like
it
those
reminds
events.
me a lot of the film There Will Be Blood. Like how many people got destroyed in that, I guess, the oil rush or wherever it was. But then at the same time, look how that shaped the world afterwards.
Right. Everything is, it's like walking on eggshells in a way, because like you never know what's going to break and when. And it's very difficult to navigate. Like I don't blame people for feeling angry about those technologies, like feeling angry about AI, feeling angry about crypto, feeling angry about this and that. Like it's like, you know, someone who works, like let's say someone who works in AI as a programmer is going to tell you like, yeah, like you can like totally learn how to use this and build your own tools. It's like, it's such a naive approach in a way, because like you have to realize most of the people have like families. You work hard your all day, and like you have to put all your energy to learn things just to keep up. And now someone's asking you to like completely pivot on the spot in no time and learn new things. It's like, yeah, if you're like well versed in understanding, and even people who work on this don't understand where this is going, but if you're even well versed enough to kind of predict or at least pay attention, it's like, are you going to be able to adapt so fast? Like too, are you even like, it's like, it's hard to make a decision which software you're going to use, because like you don't know those kind of things. It's like very difficult, and making decisions what kind of job you're going to pick, if this project is right for you or not. And then let alone like think, oh, what am I going to do in 5 years, and what kind of career when I'm 45 supposed to pick? It's like, if you're in your 20s, it's like so much easier to make that decision, right? Because you have so much less on the line. But if you're like feeding your family and have kids and like, and have a pretty established life, whether it's good or not, like you still, you know, having an expectation that you're going to be like on the spot pivoting left and right in like the rapid fashion that AI is bringing, for instance, it's like, that's a tall order for vast majority of the society. So I don't think, I guess the silver lining of this is like, you know, people complain about governments and laws moving slowly, but when they move slowly but surely, right? Like eventually something becomes a law, and it is what it is, right? And I just don't see a world in which this just goes rampant and unchecked for a long time, because you literally have an example of things going rampant and unchecked for just a few months with crypto, and the fucking hammer goes heavy now, which is good, which is like way overdue. Like those things were supposed to be looked into like way long ago. But it's fascinating. I'm curious where it's all going to go.
Dude, yeah, I think curious is a great way to look at it. And also, yeah, it's almost like we're in a rudderless ship and just kind of seeing where we float. You mentioned a second ago about predictions and like, you know, a few years in the future, but we're approaching the end of the podcast, but also the end of the year. I'm sure you've hit many milestones this year for yourself. This is a milestone episode in episode 50. So what I guess like, we can use the final words for the podcast as well, but what are things, I guess, predictions, as we've spoken about today, is almost futile nowadays because everything's changing so rapid. Our human brains can't handle it. But what are you excited for next year?
I am definitely excited where all of those technologies going to go, you know, and what does it mean for everything? Like, honestly, it's scary, but it's also exciting in a way, because like, I'm going to be very selfish about what I'm going to say right now. It's like, just like everyone else, I hate being scared and I hate uncertainty, and it's driving me crazy. And I wish life was as easy when I was a kid, where you would go play with friends and you wouldn't have cell phones and life was much slower. Mm-hmm. Right? But back in the days, no cell phones, you would just like hang out, and it's like, and you know, the productivity levels, everything was like, the expectations of things were completely different. How the life flows and all those things. And it's just different now. It's not better or worse. It's just different, you know? And I feel like the life's going to be different in the next 10 years. But I just cannot. What makes it scary is that you don't know. Like, you don't exactly know what's going to happen. And it's like futile to predict, because you might be right. And then that's the anecdotal. Like, you were lucky to predict something that's right, but then there's 100 people who tried to predict and they were wrong. So it's very difficult to kind of predict, and it's scary. But sometimes I feel like those kind of monumental paradigm shifts, like I still think that I don't even think that, like, go listen to like big companies, you know, Mark Zuckerberg, you know, Elon Musk, all of those, like, they all are at least mentally invested in what the Web3 is going to be. Like, the infrastructures are, they didn't stop being built. It's still going on. This is like actually the perfect time for people who are in this to build something cool, and not for the money, let's say, you know, because like, you cannot expect that the crypto market isn't like what is in the bear market, technically speaking, if you're like that kind of person that cares about this, right? And people who like really care about making millions of dollars in this market, they're all gone, like, because they know they cannot scam people. Like, I mean, there are still bad actors still there. It's always gonna happen. But the exorbitant amount of money, kind of schemes and everything that was going on, and whether it was like amazing projects or shitty projects, most of it is gone. Like, the volume of transaction is like 90% or 95% lower than it used to be a year ago. It's clearly like things are going into the like dead winter in a way. But that's exactly like what, if you look historically, like, you know, .com, when everything collapsed, there was just a fraction of people who kept believing in the technology, and then created Google, created fucking all of those places, right? Those companies didn't just pop up. They were worked on for years through those transitional paradigm shifts. So I feel like we are in one big paradigm shift of Web 2 going into Web 3. It's a roller coaster. And then we're in this massive generational paradigm shift of AI, which is like, good luck predicting. It's exciting. It could be anything, but it is sort of, you know, you are, when you're excited about something, or like, when you're scared about something, it puts you on the edge and makes you pay attention, which I think brings you to a point where you're actually going to make more wise decisions.
Dude, that was amazing. Thank you so much. So much to unpack there, and so many topics that we didn't touch upon that we can, I'm sure, do in a future episode. But yeah, man, thanks for coming on. Yeah,
of course. I mean, Learn Squared, I co-founded it. Like, I should show up sometimes.
And yes, everyone listening, this episode is brought to you by ChatGPT 3. Thank you for listening.
Well, everything we said was written by AI.
A huge thanks to Maciej for dropping by and dropping those wisdom bombs. Please let us know what you think about AI and the other themes mentioned in this episode by leaving a comment or sending us a message. Remember, you can always further enhance your own artistry, and Learn Squared is the best place to do that. Learn from Maciej and the rest of our Learn Squared instructors by hitting the links attached to this episode. And of course, if you want to see what Maciej is up to, you can find his links there too. I've been your host, Aaron Danda. Thanks for listening. Happy holidays. Have a great end to the year. Till next time.